Thank you everyone for coming. Joseph, you already know this, but Lucy is going to be my lovely co-host for today. We're going to be talking a lot about Kurt Vonnegut, and I'm assuming that you've all heard of the book, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But yeah, thank you so much for taking some time out of your Sunday, whether it's afternoon, morning, evening. I feel like I see there's like a wide variety of different backgrounds. But yeah, looking forward to this discussion. And I think that maybe in terms of getting started, I was kind of thinking we could just do like a round of intros since we're a smaller group. This is also my first time like hosting a salon, so like in general, like I just feel like it's nice to get to know a little bit of the community as well. But yeah, we can start off. I was thinking we could do like a who are you and like what are you hoping to get out of the discussion? Like if you have a specific question you want to talk about, or if you just have like a general desire or goal that you have. So I can start and then maybe we can just kind of popcorn it around afterwards. So, I'm Nancy. For me, a big motivator of reading this book actually is because I feel like the world around us is really like, for me at least, I didn't feel like I understood enough about what was going on with AI, but also just understanding what my stance was on it. And I don't know how I got in touch with this book. I think I might have seen it on Reddit or something. But I was amazed to see that it was something that was written 60, 70 years ago, and it feels like a lot of these concepts are now relevant to today's society. So I wanted to, first of all, let more people know about it. I've been like telling all my friends about this book for the past few months. But I also wanted to make sure, like, I wanted to see what other people thought about it. So this is a little bit of a selfish desire for me to organize the salon. Lucy, I'm gonna just pass it over to you so you can tell people a little about who you are as well.
So I'm Lucy. Nancy and I met in college and have been friends ever since. So many, many years now. We're both about 85.
Yeah, old pals.
And I was one of the friends who Nancy was talking about with this book. Talked about this book with me for months, and I kept saying, "Okay, okay, I got to read it, Nancy." And I finally did and said, "We got to talk about this." So I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts.
All right, and then feel free to pick the next person,
Uh,
and we'll just keep doing that for.
Audit.
Hello, nice to be here. So a little bit about me. Also friends with Nancy, and I do like Vonnegut quite a bit. So I've read some of his earlier works, but this was the first time that I read Player Piano. Um, Definitely excited to talk about it, but I think one thing I would like to maybe get from our discussion later is, um, what are the parts, the more optimistic sides that we can see from a book like this, which is, pretty, I think, pessimistic and a lot of its outlooks. And I'm sure we'll talk about how it connects to today's world. But I guess with all of those connections, is there something else that we can take from what Vonnegut is saying and how we can kind of proceed with the world as it is and how he describes it? So excited to talk to you guys about that. But I'll popcorn it over to Andy.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Um, yeah, I've previously read Slaughterhouse-5 at uni and discussed it there. It was quite interesting. And yeah, so the salon piqued my curiosity. Um, I'm hoping we might touch on the future of work and the positive, maybe not so positive side of what the future looks like with AI. Yeah, that's me. I'll pass to Jamie.
Hi. Um, yeah, so in terms of just seemed interesting in terms of a topic under discussion, and obviously heard of Vonnegut before, and in terms of what kind of at least interested in for sort of prescient bits of kind of been touched on already, but also just kind of sort of uh, not kind of correct bits also kind of interesting, sort of how someone in the 50s kind of viewed how the world might be futuristically and like the vacuum tubes and stuff like that, and things where it was this is what it could be, and then it just transpired it didn't come out that way for whatever reason, and the sort of US has what socialized it, healthcare and all that in the book, which have just not kind of not that it's like he's doing a prediction necessarily, but it's just how it kind of differed from what he kind of imagined. But yeah, and who?
I think William and Joseph.
But yeah, either of them who want to go next would be good.
Hey, how's it going? It's William. Excited to chat with all you all about Kurt Vonnegut and player piano. This is my first time reading this book, but honestly kind of blown away by how good it is. So excited to chat more about it. And again, sorry, I'm actually in a bookstore right now. I'm not in my office, but I will, I'll be on mute in case there's any background noise.
Joseph, go ahead.
Yes, I'm having trouble with, oh, there we go. Let's see if I can do that.
Ah, perfect.
Okay. Anyway, I read this book, as I mentioned, probably 30 years ago originally, and then I read it more recently with a friend. We have a little book group, and I was just very impressed that he was interested in what I would say ties in with the sort of, some people call it the meaning crisis nowadays. So the fact that if things were provided to you by factory, you would lose your sense of meaning in life because everything, you didn't have to do anything. And if you didn't have to do anything, that was going to be a problem. I was just really impressed that that was where he went with the book.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to quickly summarize what I think people have mentioned. Some people talked about just like finding the more optimistic sides of work as well as the optimistic sides of like what this book is, what is the future of what work looks like and AI. Differences between what Vonnegut imagined and what the world looks like today in terms of like, was he, just ahead of his time, or were there things that we actually think are not going to pan out the way that he predicted it? And then I think Joseph, you had mentioned this piece around like, how do we think like factories as a way of removing meaning? How does that affect like the world today, potentially? Did I capture all of that? Anything else anyone wants to add to the list of potential discussion topics? Great. Okay, so I think in terms of how we're going, just wanted to establish some ground rules first, and then we'll break into some questions. Lucy and I have some prepared that we'll probably kick things off with, but after that, very free form. I feel like there's a lot of good questions that people are thinking about in this group, and I'm really curious. I think we should save some time, maybe like 5 minutes at the end, Joseph, just to hear a little bit about what it was like to talk to Kurt Vonnegut, or at least hear him a couple years ago, because that's fascinating to me. I can't believe
I'm
you actually
sorry,
met him.
I didn't get a chance to talk to him. I heard him give a lecture. Sorry.
No, that's amazing. I mean, I feel like anytime you get to see the author and like learn a little bit about him, it's always interesting to see the backgrounds of these people and how they came to believe what they believe. So maybe we can reserve some 5 minutes for that. In terms of the discussion, so a couple of things I just want to note, and a lot of this might just kind of go without saying, but just good to mention it ahead of time, which is for all these questions, there's no right or wrong answers. I think it's just more of a discussion around like, hey, like objectively, what do you think? What are some of experiences that you kind of like want to bring into the discussion? Share what you're comfortable with. And yeah, I think this is a smaller group, but we should try to make sure one person is talking at a time. So try not to interrupt. If there's ever a point where you're like, oh, I've been like dying to say something and people are just ignoring me, feel free to just use the hand raise, because I know that does happen sometimes. Either like just raising your hand or use the hand raise function on Zoom. And then finally, like, I don't think there's any time boxed responses or anything. We'll just kind of move on as we feel like it's natural. So, yeah. Thank you again for everyone that is on camera or even attempting to, because I know it's kind of vulnerable to be, just like sharing your face and like potentially like if you're getting tired to like have your face on the screen like that. But it's always appreciated when we're having these kinds of discussions. So cool. Lucy, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about like the player piano title itself. Did you want to kick off with that potentially?
Sure, thank you.
All right.
So do we all know what a player piano is? And if anyone is unclear on it, can someone give a description of what it actually is?
I'm going to show my age again. I've actually played on a player piano.
Oh, wow.
This was very popular back in the early 1900s, I would say. If you wanted music before there was radio, there was this device called the player piano, and you had a roll of paper with holes punched in it that you would put inside the player piano, and then you would pump a pedal at the bottom, and the paper would move, and it would read the holes on the paper as notes to play on the piano, and it would play the piano. So if you couldn't play a piano, you could still play a piano, so to speak.
And how did they decide how to space those notes?
Well, yeah, I think actually in many cases they had someone, a real pianist, sit down at a machine that would, as the keys were pressed, would punch holes in this paper tape. And then when you play the paper tape back, you reproduce what the pianist had played. And in fact, there are some instances where they have some famous composers who have actually recorded their own works. There's just a handful of these, I believe. I think they have maybe they have George Gershwin playing some of his music or something like that. And it was very, very popular, as I say, before radio. Imagine before records, even. If you wanted music in your house, you either had to perform it yourself, or you needed a device like the player piano that would perform that function.
Hmm. Yeah, Andy, I like your comment in the chat. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
It's something that just popped into my head. Yeah, it's quite reassuring that it didn't eliminate humans from playing pianos. So I think that's a big fear we have now.
Mhm.
If technology can do what we do, we won't be needed anymore. But yeah, there's still the human element, especially with, music as well. So having that technology that could play it perfectly, I guess, like if you had a performance, it would be cheaper
Mm.
just to chuck in was it like a punch card kind of setup or reel? But yeah, people still wanted humans to perform. So that's cool. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. Like, I hadn't thought about it that way when I actually didn't know what a player piano was until Lucy brought up the question. But it was interesting to think about, like, we even during the pandemic, right? Like, you could get everything, delivered to your doorstep. You could listen to music on Spotify. But I think people were really craving this, like, human interpersonal element that I think very similar to the player piano. It's like we have this technology and it should make things more efficient, but we still want to see people do it live. So.
So how should we connect that to the book as just a starting point into some of the overall themes? What does that make you think of from the book? And I have to pull, perhaps a good example, despite buying bread at the store, I've now tried to make bread. And even though it's gone terribly awry and I need to pull it out of the oven now, I'm still happy I went to the trouble,
Yeah, I saw like quite a few parallels in the book, from different angles. So one, of course, it could be um, like the base of like computers replacing the labor force, or machines replacing labor force there. But then it was also even deeper, I think, because they had that like supercomputer that was like assigning people their roles and values. So it's like even replacing not just creativity in that way, but it replacing almost human ingenuity by trying to like assign it values in this way, which I think um, kind of what like the player piano is doing. So definitely there. And then maybe even just separating how like in Ilium we saw like engineers and managers were still like the labored force, they still needed a job. But then the rest were not. So is that like dividing maybe people who know how to use the player piano, how to manage it, maybe how to make those punch cards and the most optimal way to pump it versus those who don't. So those are some of the ways that I think I saw that metaphor in the book.
Do you all remember the part in the book where it's just a small moment, but the Ewing Halyard, the guy from the State Department, was taking the Shah around, and they were talking about artists in this society and how he was bragging that they have thousands of artists who are working hard to reproduce all of the classics, the Goyas and the Picassos and so on. So what did that make you all think of, or how did you feel about it?
I mean, personally, it just seemed that there's nothing kind of new within the society. It's a kind of set for sort of limits of creation or what can be accomplished in the society, when it's just trying to maximize that according to the resources available and trying to make everything more efficient, but it's not trying to go onwards in any way. There's no sort of plan or just even allowance for anything new or kind of serendipitous kind of creation to occur within that society. It's all kind of hermetically sealed, where it's just kind of slowly becoming more machine-like as a society. There's no spontaneous or spontaneity within it, or allowing for something new and vibrant to take place.
Do you think it's fair to say that there's no creativity in this society?
I mean, with that, within the part where you kind of there's some bits, but like is it Bud, the guy at the Ilium, but he kind of creates a thing and then brings himself out of a job because the system he creates is more efficient than him. So there's like creativity within the bounds of a sort of society they've got set up already, but there's nothing new to sort of, or like revolutionary in terms of like a completely brand new idea. It's all within the bounds of what's already known.
That's actually a really interesting question, Lucy, because I'm thinking about like the times where things failed in the book, and it's like there's the time with like the checkers game, and then there's also like in the beginning with like the cat. It's like I think part of the reason why it dies so quickly is because it's doing all these unexpected moves, right? To the point where it just like can't survive because the machines don't know how to respond to it. And then I think there's another moment where Paul is like trying to get back into society, Millennium, maybe after he got kicked out from the Meadows, and he's like just trying to like I can't remember what he was trying to do, but it's like he was like, oh, like the coffee machine is automated, like trying to like buy like a drink. Like he wasn't able to do any of that because it was all like all the services were sold by machines.
Mm-hmm. And what about on the other side of the river from him in Homestead with the Alfie, the guy who guesses what's playing on the TV, and Luke Lubbock and the other people who participate in that parade? What do you all make of that in this context about creativity?
I don't remember too much about that moment, but if someone else does, then
Yeah, Nancy and I can talk about the book anytime, but we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I saw it as like, well, I was taking parallels to how I look at AI and things today. And, one of the more optimistic viewpoints that I don't think is necessarily true, but what people might say is if we replace some of these more rote tasks and mundane tasks, it should give us as humans the opportunity to like for more creativity. Like that would be great if somehow we had more time to pursue our creative like outbursts there. But something I was seeing in the book, and I was thinking of as well, is like, well, if we don't change like the value system and how we kind of like how in player piano, I think a lot of what Vonnegut was saying is how much of your identity and your worth is based off of like your output, the work that you are outputting. And when these people lost the chance to do that, they were losing their identity. So maybe they were finding some outlets of creativity. And I think they were successful at it, but even valuing what they were doing as creative was hard to do in that society because there was you know, a lot of it was based on your capitalistic metrics of like what is worth it, what is good. And I think that's very similar to today. Like maybe if it gives us more time to do those things, that's great, but are we going to value it as much in, you know, our current value system, which is at a macro scale, at least a lot about making, you know, money or, you know, stock performance going up, things like that.
Lucy, I am curious, like, what was the line of thinking when you were coming up with these questions? Like, did you have a thought of your own?
Um, well, I thought the parades in Homestead were really interesting in that nobody had to do them, of course. It's not their part of their job, even if they were in the reeks and wrecks and they had something of a job, even if it was a bit fake in some ways. Um, People chose to get together in groups and play dress up basically and form these secret societies, and put a lot of effort into them too, even though there's not much that they could do. Um, how much of that is a symptom of some of the things Audit was talking about, where if you have your identity taken away in the sense of not being able to make things, do people just come up with a new identity, and how do they do that? I think that's part of what the parade was about. But I'm curious if people had other thoughts.
Yeah, I think I really like what he's talking about, but I think it is perhaps unrealistic that people would not have come up with some other thing to do, given that they couldn't work. I understand that's a major impact, that if people are replaced and they don't have to work and they have a reasonable life, quality of life without having to work, that's going to be a major impact. But I would think it's likely that something else would arise that people would do to occupy their time. And you know, I think he was very prescient in terms of talking about automation possibly replacing work, and you know, it is a story after all. But I wonder in real life what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe this is going a little bit to what Jamie was alluding to earlier, which is like Vonnegut has this vision of what the future would look like, and then we have today's society where it feels very much like a analogous to like what kind of world he was imagining. And like Jamie, you kind of mentioned that as a question of like what are some of the differences that we see? Like I'm wondering like did you see any differences when you were reading through it? Or like yeah, like what are some thoughts that you have about how this world that we live in could be different?
Um, well, I mean, one sort of just way is a kind of a product of his time almost, but it's in terms of social relations, it kind of seems very traditional almost. Like there's been this great upturn in like change in the economic in that world, but then everything's kind of a picture perfect 1950s house with like wives at home, secretaries for, and then that's kind of clear division between different races as well. So it's like it's sort of been a like complete change in one way, but it seemed to just not affect the other sort of styles of like how America is in the book. It's like yeah, so it's this massive change, and yet it's only kind of impacted select areas, and it's left everything else the same, which seems unlikely. Like as just in like our actual history, when we have these big changes, they often tend to have social effects as well. And yet, in this, it's kind of imagining things are just a constant, which it just, well, obviously hasn't been.
Yeah, Nancy and I wanted to ask you all about the role of women in the book. and what you think about that. I think you're definitely right, Jamie, that it's strange to see such technological and economic and other changes without social changes. But I saw the role of women in particular in the book as fairly plausible as a means of social control. And if it's a highly stratified society, so the fact that there was that clear division to control women also actually made a lot of sense to me. But I'm curious what you all think.
Well, I mean, it was written in the 1950s, and I think it's the idea was basically leave everything the same except nobody has to work, kind of is the way to look at it. And he wasn't really thinking in terms of social change, other than the fact that nobody had to work. That was the main point. So obviously, I agree. It's likely to cause other changes, but he, I guess, chose not to address that. Oh, okay. So I'm going to throw in a quick commercial. I don't mean a real commercial, of course. What I find amazing about Vonnegut is not only was he so prescient, I think, in this novel, but he wrote a short story called Harrison Bergeron. And I don't know, Harrison Bergeron, I don't know if anybody's read that. You can read it for free online if you just do a Google search. And what is stunning about that is he also anticipated the idea of equality with capital E, bold print, underlined, meaning the very first line of the story is something along the lines of, the year was 2087 and everyone was finally equal. And he talks about the things that could come out of that, and which is obviously a big topic nowadays. And so in addition to Player Piano, there's that short story, which I thought was just kind of an amazing look at what might happen along those lines.
Thank you. That's a great addition. We can have a follow-up salon for Vonnegut short stories.
Yeah.
Vonnegut series.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I cut you off though, Joseph. Did you have anything else to add?
I don't have anything more to add right now. I'm I guess I'm feeling a little underprepared. It's been maybe a year since I read the book the second time, and I'm not remembering the details very well.
That's all right.
Nope,
So
go
don't
ahead.
worry, I've been reading it this past month and I'm still searching my memory. But going back to the discussion of like the portrayal of women and their roles, I don't know when the story is supposed to be. It's like in the near future, but it felt like his vision of the future wasn't very futuristic. Like, okay, things had been automated, but there's a lot to play with when you are writing some kind of science fiction and imagining the future, the whole realm of possibility. And yeah, in this version of the future, it seems like, yeah, it was a future version of 50s, maybe. And you know, he hadn't really imagined progress apart from work and things being automated. It didn't seem like there was a great deal of like social progress. There was a lot of, you know, the kind of two-tier society with the engineers and the more prosperous people on one side of the river, and the Rex and Reeks or something they were called on the other side of the river. So yeah, I don't know, it's quite interesting.
I had a similar thought, Andy, especially at the beginning of the book, trying to situate myself in what time this is and what's going on. I think it's interesting context that the book was written in 1952, and Vonnegut had served in the war. At one point, he was locked in a slaughterhouse to survive, I think, the bombing of Dresden, which gave some impetus later for Slaughterhouse-Five, although he wrote this book before then. And so in 1952, it wasn't that long ago that women had been working in the war effort. Society was different in many ways, not necessarily on social levels, but in the way the economy was run, and the effort of producing everything that was needed for the war was so intense. And that's something that is mirrored in the book, I think, because sometimes when Paul is reminiscing, he's thinking about what happened to provoke the war and what happened after the war, when people came back from it and suddenly had all of these demands for goods, but there was no demand from a war effort to do all that production. So in some ways, I think that was supposed to be a parallel to what actually happened in World War II and the social consequences of that.
At least in some of the other Vonnegut stories I've read, I think he does like that. It's one that's particularly one of the strengths of his writing is it's like, okay, let me present this new futuristic concept, but like just suspend disbelief here. Like society is with you on this. Like, sure, time travel might exist in this, or like, sure, this apparition appears once a year, and everyone is just on board with that. But it's like now taking that and like analyzing how society is, whether because of that or in spite of that, I think allows him to make, really like takes on modern society, modern at his time, that is very easy to relate to. Because even though there's this like, sci-fi element to it, it's like, okay, well, it's not that hard to imagine that like here's a world without work, kind of like what Joseph was saying earlier. And then like just based on that, let's find the pieces that that could result from that. So I think in a lot of his stories, he's not always trying to like capture all of the outcomes that might be a result of this technology, but like let me hyper focus in on whether it be like consumerism in society, or whether it be like the effectiveness of a very populist leader or something like that. But like let's just analyze that, but we also have this like sci-fi thing to help make that argument, which I think is a little bit different and unique in the sci-fi fantasy world, especially now where like world building and things like that are a very important component, I think, of a lot of more modern sci-fi and fantasy books.
Nancy,
Yeah.
oh, I was going to ask you if we should do some name analysis or continue.
Ooh. I want to come back to that one. I feel like a discussion point that I thought was kind of interesting, maybe kind of where we're headed towards, is like this feeling of like this world almost feels like real, even though like as a society we have progressed, right? Like women are working now, and we have like a lot more tech, like there's technologies that he could not have even foreseen when he wrote the book. Um, and like, yeah, I think one of the things, I'm just gonna pull a discussion question selfishly that I had from earlier, which is just around like this idea that um clearly Paul and his friend, I don't remember his name, but like the one that was like really, he was a bit of a genius, but he was also like kind of going in between these two societies. Do you remember his name, Lucy? Maybe I guess that's why you would want to do the name analysis, but
Finnerty?
Yes. So yeah, so Finnerty and Paul both seem like people that were just like very dissatisfied in their jobs. But if you think about it, like they both kind of had everything, right? They had like a high paying job, they had status, and they also kind of just had the ability to get whatever they wanted, really. Like even Paul, like he wanted to work at a farm and he could have done that theoretically, like if he wanted to. But both of them are really dissatisfied, or at least that was my perception. So I guess like my question for you all is like, do you agree with that? And then also it's like, if they're dissatisfied, then like what actually, like why are they dissatisfied if they could just do whatever they wanted?
And maybe as a follow-up to that, why does Paul, when he finally gets the chance, he's bought the farm, he's gotten fired, he can do whatever he wants, truly, he doesn't work the farm?
Well, I was just thinking this was written in the 50s, right? And Vonnegut was in the war. And one of the things about the war is that it did, even though it's a horrible thing that was happening, it did bring people together and give people a sense of purpose that they were doing something. And this player piano could be like taking it to the other extreme, and it could be kind of a reaction to the feeling of, I was in this war and I was doing something, and maybe it's not, there's a lot of not pleasant things happening, but there's this sense of we're all in this together. But then when you come out of the war, that's not available anymore. And if you take that to the extreme, you end up in a situation where nobody is needed to do anything, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Finity in the book has kind of been rebelling against the strictures of the society all his time, because he's like perpetually dirty and unkempt and people are remarking on it, and he's kind of generally acting in a way to try to shock sort of typical opinion and consorting with people who are socially beneath him, and it's just kind of accepted because he's that good. So I think it's more, he just doesn't have anything, but he knows he dislikes how it currently is, and so wants to kind of destroy it, or not, well, at least just rebel against it, but he doesn't have a clear idea of alternative. So it's more just kind of lashing out, trying to get a rise out of people, trying to shock people by his eccentricities almost. And
it's a desperation
yeah.
to change things, but not really knowing where we're going, where you're going.
Is that why the rebellion didn't go so well? The Ghost Church Society?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a kind of a clear vision almost of what it is. It's just people kind of saying this feels wrong, but they don't have anything to move on to past that. You can't, there's like a sort of, but I mean, towards the end, obviously, there's like a bit of there's sort of destruction, but then there's rebuilding. But that's just because there's no idea of, they're kind of so deeply ingrained in the society that there's no alternative they can think of what to build. It's just, we have to go back to what it was almost, because there's nothing else which anyone has an idea of which could be a viable alternative. It's just return to the same, even if you think it's, even if you feel within your soul it's wrong, you just have to eventually go back to it, because there's no other thing apart from, I don't know, the Shah kind of system. But it's just, yeah, there's stuck without an option, even if you feel bad.
Yeah, something about the end that really stuck out to me is like first they're like, oh, this rebellion couldn't have been successful anyways, but we just didn't want to tell people that. And I was like thinking like, okay, like I guess in the past, like whenever there's been like a protest, I guess like in most recent times, I guess I'm speaking a little bit out of naivete, but it feels like protests or like when people go out and like they want to do like a petition or something, like it doesn't feel like there's like any like meaningful change that we've seen from like a from the government perspective. So like that's the first thing that I thought of, and I was like, people felt very cynical, and I was really surprised that they didn't actually believe in the cause that they were actually fighting for. And then I think the second piece was just towards the end where he was mentioning like, even though they were trying to like fight against the system and they had won, they were effectively just rebuilding it in a different form. Like they talk about how like the recent Rex were out there and they were like brainstorming like ways to change the society, but in effect they were just kind of rebuilding what was already there.
And literally rebuilding when they come upon Bud Calhoun and some other people actually trying to repair one of the machines that some other part of the mob had destroyed. They literally just went right back into it to get it back together.
Yeah. Yeah, so it makes you think like, was that successful, or is it just kind of like a like what was Vonnegut trying to say about that? I don't really know like how that affects um our perception of society when we're like also kind of at the same time, I think in today's age trying to change things, but it feels like it's just leading to more of the same potentially.
Mm.
Yeah, I think part of that, at least my interpretation, was that these things aren't always like linear in their progress. So even with the name, like the Ghost Shirt Society, like falling back to this real historical tragedy that ended in a similar way, like resistance that was squashed and didn't end up trying to accomplish its objective. But the name stuck around, and maybe the influence stuck around enough that these guys wanted to like carry on with that spirit. So in the same way, perhaps even though this revolution or this rebellion didn't have a real plan for rebuilding after just starting a fire, um, maybe the repercussions of it in terms of how it will affect the culture and just stay in the public consciousness, similar to the prior ghost shirt or tragedy. Maybe that's something like it's not what they wanted, it's not the progress they wanted to see, but it is this perhaps a baby step in the consciousness there. And then also just addressing one of the earlier things that we were talking about, of like when Paul was had the option of staying on his farm. I think a big part of this book is comparing conformity to integrity. I think a lot of the systems in place in this book were like rewarding conformity. Like Paul had all of the right things, right? He's son of this like famous engineer, smart guy, went to the right schools, knows how to like navigate that political sphere of work. And even though he's like not working very hard, he just keeps like, yeah, if you just stay on course, you're gonna get promoted, get to Pittsburgh, get all of those things. But when he realizes like this is going against my integrity a little bit, that's when he stops. And I think in the same vein, like he could have stayed on the farm, but by that point he had been maybe like awakened to the realities that other people in the society were facing. Like, is it okay for just me personally to escape these binds and live my happy life on the farm if I know that all of these other people have the same like anguish in them and I'm abandoning them? Maybe it's like going a little against him finally getting that integrity and failing for it, and it wasn't a great outcome for him, but at least it's something. And maybe that importance of that integrity in the face of conformity is something that Vonnegut is trying to express.
Yeah, my interpretation of that farm part was that he realized it was a lot harder than he expected. And he was like, oh, I don't actually think I. It kind of reminds me of people nowadays where they're like, oh, it would be great to be able to open up a coffee shop instead of like working my investment banking job. But then, if you actually think about what it means to be a coffee shop owner, it's a lot more stressful of like, okay, how do I price the coffee? How do I source it? So that was my initial take on it. But I do think that your point initially of like this conformity over integrity thing is interesting because I do think so much of like the life that is portrayed in this book is predictable. And I think if you think about algorithms, right? Like how often do you like look on your social media feed and you're like, oh, this all seems really interesting. And it's like I feel like there's a sense of frustration to be like predicted so accurately. My hopeful belief is that people are going to be really sick of these algorithms because they're just going to be feeding off of what you did in the past. And it's really hard at like predicting what is happening in the future. But I feel like yeah, just going back to what you're saying, audit, it does feel kind of like there's a sense of like, if I just continue to conform, then I know what my life is going to look like from now on. And maybe it's a rejection of that.
I think a lot of times too, it's not, the choice isn't put quite so clearly as it was to Paul, especially when he was asked to turn in Finnerty, basically. And I think at one point Vonnegut writes that rarely is such a basic, essential moral decision put so clearly to someone. And that was the sense Paul had of it too. And some of the frustration that people may have going off of what you were saying, Nancy, is that conformity is appealing, and it seems like it may be in people's best interest. They may have some discomfort with it, but it's not quite such a clear choice of, you know, do I let this algorithm choose my Spotify playlist for me, or do I be a nonconformist? The moral character of the decision isn't really clear in most cases, or in some cases anyway, these days. I'm curious if you all agree or have other thoughts. Do you think that Paul's desire to go live on a farm, Nancy compared it to the professionals trying to go open a coffee shop, something of which both of us have discussed doing, so we know that's real. But is that part of a much bigger, longer trend in American history? I'm thinking of the ideal of the yeoman farmer, and that we can all just be rugged individualists living out our days on the farm. How do you think?
Well, yeah, to generalize that you could ask the question why he wrote this novel. You know, what was he trying to accomplish? Because this was the 50s. Things were going, look, it certainly was not perfect. Okay. You can always identify things you don't like. But let's say the economy, you know, the war was over, the economy was growing, getting great guns, the United States was on top of the world. And why did he write this novel? Maybe part of it is just to be contrarian, to say, well, if you know, people would say, gee, I wish I didn't have to get up in the morning and go to this job, you know. Well, okay, let's just imagine a society where you don't have to do that, and let's see where that leads. I don't know. He certainly is known for writing books and stories with quirky ideas. So I don't know. I also don't know. Obviously, he continued to be an author, but does anybody know how well the book actually did? Did it make a big splash or no?
No. And I was reading about this a couple days ago. It didn't get much reception, and then it was shelved into sci-fi. And he didn't think of it as a sci-fi novel.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what?
No, well, I think he's always more satirical, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the science fiction element was not really a big part of it in his mind. But that's at the time where agents and publicists and publishers were putting it. And sci-fi at that time was much less highly regarded. There was Isaac him a big deal, or other writers. So a lot of his books didn't do that well because they were pigeonholed into sci-fi, including this one.
Well, that's a pet peeve I have about categorization. I just don't like it. I think bookstores are great things. I know they're not doing so well, and I do think having cafes and bookstores was a great idea. Whoever came up with that idea, that may be the salvation of bookstores. But I just hate it when you go into a bookstore and they've got all these categories. Now, to some extent, I understand why they feel they have to do that, but then that means they have to decide what category to put each individual book into. And that has negative effects, like you were just describing, because Vonnegut, I think, was more of a creative thinking, sort of outside the box kind of guy. And science fiction is one way to get you outside of the box, but it's not the only way. And yet they didn't really know what to think of this book, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit like meta, because I think even inside the book, it's like anyone that's going against that society is immediately like, oh, like, why would you not just do what the machine is telling you to in terms of like the punch card with your IQ on it and your genes and stuff like that? Feels kind of related.
Yeah.
I once actually accidentally bought a Scientology book because someone had put it in the science fiction section. And I'd never heard of like L. Ron Hubbard, and I read the back of it and it sounded cool. It was like in a used bookshop.
Well,
And
L.
the guy
Ron
was making fun
Hubbard,
of me. I had no idea why.
no, L. Ron Hubbard got started in science fiction. He did a number of science fiction books. He was involved with Joseph Campbell, who was involved in getting Isaac Asimov off the ground, and some other, I guess maybe Robert Heinlein also. But then he went off into Scientology. So you're to be forgiven because he did do genuine, real science fiction also. So somewhere he crossed over a line.
That's really interesting though, because it makes you think like what books are we missing out on? Because like we have specific categories in mind of what we enjoy, right? Yeah, I've never read Scientology either, but I'm like kind of curious. I think it's almost like I don't think about reading it because I'm like, oh, I don't believe in Scientology, but sometimes you have to wonder like what would it just mean to like read it?
Well, that's it. The general question I would ask is if you're interested in trying to read at least some things outside of what, the bubble. We talk about people being in bubbles nowadays. And if you're trying to get outside at least just to see what it's like, it's not obvious where to go. One of the things I thought would be interesting uh, is, and I don't think there's a way to do this, maybe there is, and I just don't know about it, is to go on YouTube and select a random video over all of YouTube, select a random video and watch a few and get some sense of what's out there. Because either typically, if you go to something like YouTube, you're either going for something specific that you want, or the algorithm, whoever wrote that, is deciding what to suggest to you as opposed to something which is more random. So,
yes, I'll open up YouTube when, like, in some way that I'm not signed in, just to see what happens, and it will suggest videos to you. It won't just be a blank screen with a search bar. Supposedly, they seem to be based on what's most popular at the time, so maybe there is no way of escaping the algorithm. But I'm always somewhat disturbed by what there's seems like the lowest common denominator.
Well, it's useful to know what's out there. I mean, I'm not suggesting we all start spending half of our lives watching, those, but I think that the metaphor of a bubble is useful because we have things which we naturally look at. We have a group of friends, we have a group of books that we've read, and so on, movies we've watched, and there's a whole nother world. There are other worlds out there that we're not paying attention to, and maybe there should be an app for this or something called the get me outside my bubble for the moment app or something.
Well, we used to have public news. I always enjoyed my mom, who I'm visiting at the moment. I don't know if she can hear this shout out, but she always sit me down for the 6 o'clock news on PBS NewsHour from the time I was a little kid. And, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has just been completely cut. So I'm sure it'll be gone if it's not already. But that was aside from being quality journalism, was always a great way to look up from the news of the day, the most pressing news of the day, international or domestic, to what are some other stories that they're covering, some things I may not have thought about in science, arts, technology, all sorts of things. But it's gone now. It's hard to think really of a similar way of getting outside of your bubble, aside from the very old-fashioned way of just traveling and meeting and talking to people. Maybe what we're doing now.
Well, that's true. That's an excellent point. This is exposing me to to people that I would not be exposed to. It's a great thing.
We should all drop a book recommendation at the end.
Yeah.
Mine is not,
Oh, yeah.
L.
Oh,
Ron
wow.
Hubbard.
Yeah, it just
Wow.
occurred to me. I don't know where y'all are located, but I feel like, yeah, like Lucy, what you're getting at reminds me of something that I was on a walk yesterday about like public infrastructure. And I live in New York. I know a couple of you do as well. But they have this concept in New York called like privately owned public spaces, where basically private developers are incentivized to create public spaces for the public to just like go and enjoy like a garden or some plaza. And she was saying like maybe the internet should have more of those too, because if you think about like the groups and like the societies that we join, the communities that we join online, I think oftentimes like it's like very exclusive, and so you don't really meet people outside of the communities that you're already part of. So like for example, like subreddits or Discord channels, like oftentimes you won't meet people outside of that. And so her question was like maybe we should incentivize social media companies to also provide some sort of like public town square sort of setting online as well. So it's an interesting thought. Before we stray too far away, Jamie, I feel like you had unmuted earlier, and I wasn't sure if you got your question across or your thought across, but if you wanted to share it, I feel like we can go back to that a little bit.
Sure, providing I remember what I was trying to say. Sorry, I think maybe it was about with farm and stuff, but I think part of it's also Paul's kind of desire for, or what the farm at least kind of represents a desire for a family. Like he kind of asks Anita to join him, and he only marries her in the first place because he thinks she's expecting a baby. Affinity's kind of the closest thing he has to a brother almost, or that kind of relationship. And yeah, he's kind of alone. I mean, the first part of the book is him sort of just being extremely lonely as a person. He doesn't have any family despite being married, and so I think the farm represents a kind of view of a simpler time, which was mentioned as sort of, but as maybe at least an ideal of having a family, a community, support, which he currently does not have. I mean, it doesn't work out, obviously.
Do you all have thoughts related to that about Kroner and his wife and how they try to present themselves as parents to all of the engineers rather aggressively?
Kroner's wife is like literally called Mom,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Although Finnerty was the only one who never really bought into it and refused to call her that.
I don't know if I'm thinking too simplistically about it, but I was almost like, is this just kind of how like companies are like, oh, we're one big family?
That's kind of how I thought of it. Yeah. Maybe a sense too of breaking down the division between personal and professional as a way of making it more of an all-encompassing life and lifestyle instead of expectations. Because they also talked about how Kroner would wax poetic and eulogize about, not eulogize, but give elegiacs about the system itself and the economic system that they were creating and supporting.
True. Well, one thing that made me think of is how um when they were like doing like the networking at the Meadows, they weren't really given any time to talk. It was just like, oh, what's your name? Who are you? And then it was like, okay, now we're on to the next thing, right? I don't know if there's any relationship between those two concepts of like the mom, the Kroner, like their affability versus like how little time that they actually get to spend getting to meet their fellow coworkers. But I thought that was interesting. I think my overall take on the book is, and I'm really curious to hear how other people thought about this, but it feels kind of like it's the lesson that I kind of got from it was like efficiency maybe is not like a lot of the concepts in the book really tended to focus on how do we make this more efficient, like how can we make a machine that automates this process, or in terms of like meeting other people, it felt like, okay, like what's the least amount of information that you need to know to like be comfortable working with someone, which is like all you need to really know is their name, I guess, and their face. So it almost felt like an indictment on efficiency and like, hey, what do we lose when we just focus on what is the most quick and effortless way to do something? I don't know, what do y'all think?
I thought it was interesting how they didn't have people working less. So in this more
Mm.
like productive society, they didn't have like a 4 hour day so they could have more people employed. It was just, yeah, these people work and these people, I guess they were pretty much portrayed as not very productive members of society. Um, and that's something I think about in the future. Like if we do start automating work, will like capitalism let us have a bit of time? So I was thinking recently, like, what is abundance?
Mm.
Because arguably the way we live now, it is quite abundant. And yeah, I went to ChatGPT to ask the question, and it kind of said something which I hadn't thought of. And it said, abundance would be not having to work to exist. So, having like freedom of time to do what you want. And I think many people these days, they work 8 hours a day or more because they have to. Like it's not necessarily through choice. Most people probably would rather be doing other things. Um, but yeah, it's interesting how the consequence wasn't like more leisure time for people to stay productive members of society, but just this minority of people get to work still, and everyone else is kind of now useless and idle. And yeah, they didn't seem to be doing well, apart from being mischievous and organizing like this rebellion. They were in the pub, uh, and yeah, kind of like making gambling games and things like that. And I think that's a fear a lot of people have, that left to their own devices, that the devil makes work for idle hands, and that yeah, in a future where people aren't working, they won't really do anything productive. But I think that's unfair because people can do creative things and spend time with their kids and study and learn stuff. And, there's lots of things you can do with your time. Um, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. I don't know what parallels there are with our near future in reality compared to that in the book. I advocate the 4 hour working day, by the way.
I would
It was
there's some big companies who are starting to go towards that, right? I feel like one recently announced. But go ahead.
People have tried it. I mean, people used to work an awful lot, and people really had to fight for the 8 hour day.
Right.
I think in Chicago they had riots and people died because someone threw a bomb in the crowd or something. And
Well, they
that's
have rights, it's
isn't that May Day? Is the
That's not related to a Chicago riot, I don't think.
Haymarket?
Yeah, Haymarket riot. Yeah, I actually live in Chicago, but I'm not familiar with the details. I know there's a memorial, I believe, at where it happened.
I believe it was people protesting to like give us an 8 hour working day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was definitely a thing.
Yeah, I'm reading about it right now. The rally began peacefully in support of workers striking for an 8-hour workday, and then it led to May Day. So right
Oh,
on
it did
both
lead to
counts.
May Day. I'm wrong about that. Okay.
It says it was part of that movement, so it might not have been the direct
Oh,
thing, but that's so interesting. Because yeah, they were. I remember reading another book, not related to this one, but it was about like how things like banning child labor and the 8-hour workday were a direct result of the Industrial Revolution and the fact that people could just like produce so much more now with machines.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, and their argument was like because of the fact that we have automation or AI now, like we should have like a similar sort of guidelines put in place. I don't
Right.
think that we really see it, and I think like Andy, it's really interesting that you call that out of like the book doesn't really seem to mention any sort of progress in that way either. Like kind of similar to how we were saying before with like no social progress, it feels like everything's kind of just been kind of constant. Um, but yeah, like it does get you thinking like what would that actually look like? Like 4-hour workday. I don't know. It almost makes me think like what are some other things that we could do to like make light of the fact that we are working. I think like with the machines, like we can afford to work a lot less now.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back in history, if you go back to 1700 or something, almost everybody was on a farm, and if you were on a farm, you were working a lot. There wasn't like you get up in the morning, go into work at 9 o'clock, and come home at 5. No, no, you had to do whatever was necessary to produce food or take care of animals on the farm. So this in the Industrial Revolution is relatively recent development in history,
Mm, true.
um, and we're still working. I mean, it's a continuing process, and now AI is coming in, and who knows?
You're kind of right. Like we've gotten to like work less and less over time, where like as the farm side, like I guess like back then when you were owning a farm, you couldn't really say like, "Oh, I'm going to stop working now," because then your crops probably would die. But now the stakes are a lot lower, so that's nice.
Yeah,
Um,
and the whole family work. This whole business of a woman staying home to take care of the children and so on. That comes from the Industrial Revolution. That because before that, everybody was, you were all on the farm basically, and that was everybody did what they needed to do.
So I kind of want to ask another question of the group, and then I also want to make sure, like, since you're all on the call and we're also just getting closer to the second half of this book session, I want to make sure you also get your questions in too, so we can do a little bit of that round robin. But one question I had is, there was a conversation that I had recently where someone was saying, like, how like AI, there's a lot of studies right now that say like it makes people dumber or like less able to make decisions potentially because you can outsource it to ChatGPT or like whatever your preferred chatbot is. And they were saying like maybe that's not a bad thing because that allows people to focus on other skills that might not have been invented yet. So as an example with farming, like not everyone needs to be a farmer, not everyone needs to know how to grow crops, but because that freed up some people, then they were able to do something else, like maybe like start learning how to sew or like learning how to create cups and bowls and like pottery and stuff like that. So it was really interesting for me to hear that because I was like, okay, I think naturally it feels kind of wrong to say that it's okay for some people to be not educated in that way. Which is why I kind of want to pose that question to you all. Like, do you think it's actually fine that everyone's using it, ChatGPT so much? And yes or no? And if not, like, what do you think needs to be done from that, I guess?
Well, I think it all depends on how you're using it because it's a thing, it's available. Uh, People are going to use it. My youngest girl just graduated from college less than
Congrats.
a year ago, and she says, "Boy, people were using it like crazy in college, and the teachers or professors are trying to figure out how to respond to it because it hardly makes sense to assign writing as homework because people are going to use AI." Um, But on the other hand, it clearly can do amazing things, and I think it's going to be with us. And the smart thing to do is to figure out how to use it effectively. And there's this. I assume people have heard of the Khan Academy.
Mhm.
Evidently, Khan, the leader of the academy, was given early access to some of this AI stuff, and they've been working to integrate it into their teaching materials. And the idea that they're pursuing is basically to give every student their own personal tutor. So you can talk to this AI tutor, and he's a pretty solid guy, I think. And they're reporting some very interesting results. I don't know where it's going to go in the long run, but the whole concept of 20 students sitting in a classroom watching a teacher all day, that was never really the greatest possible approach. It was I think, a reasonable, practical answer to how to do education. But if you had to choose between that and having your own private tutor, now you still want socialization to take place. But if you're struggling over algebra and some other student is struggling over English composition, there's no reason why you both should be in exactly the same classes for exactly the same length of time. It makes sense to do some accommodation, I think. So I think there's some real good possibilities here, but we have to see how it unfolds.
I mean, even in the society and player piano, I mean, they test for IQ, but say like Kruger is a kind of quite lousy engineer according to a thing, and for Bud, for example, there seems to be sort of like a discrepancy between how the IQ is assessed and how sort of good they actually seem to be in terms of coming up with new things, or how sort of useful they are to the society in which they find themselves. It's not like a case of IQ is the sole determinant. There's stuff, the sort of assessment isn't as good as they're kind of treating it. It's there's these like intangible things which aren't sort of being accounted for in their system.
Yeah, maybe tying that into what Joseph was saying about teaching, what are some of the intangible things that maybe if you're optimizing for efficiency, as Nancy was pointing out, maybe one of the themes of the book is that optimizing for efficiency and economic efficiency is not always the answer, or at least that some things are left behind. What concerns do we have about AI or other technologies or our society leaving some things behind when we optimize for efficiency, economics, whatever, GDP?
I guess isn't it just sort of the the things which happen unexpectedly, like the cat, where the machines just aren't capable of dealing with it. So sort of new situations where, and there's what the train conductor talks about, stuff which like isn't within the job sort of description itself, but they had to do. And so yeah, I think it's stuff where the machine can sort of be reasonably trained for it, but a person in that situation would be able to respond with a sort of at least hopefully common sense approach, which would be able to like do a sort of good enough job.
I would say I'm quite worried about using AI as a crutch. So maybe someone struggles with writing emails and they turn to AI to help them. But do they use it to learn how to write emails, or do they just delegate that task to AI and it just then writes their emails forever? And then it hasn't really helped them. And probably AI's voice shines through. We're all starting to recognize it, and then consequently, people don't even read their emails anymore. Or maybe it steals their voice. It's no longer them, it's AI. But yeah, I use it at work. I'm a software engineer, and yeah, use it quite a lot to see if it helps my productivity. And yeah, I'm so torn as to whether it's good or not. Like sometimes there'll be something like I'm trying to debug something that's broken and it does it super quick. And I think, wow, that's just saved me, hours of time and cognitive load. And now my brain is free to work on something else. But I've lost something as well. So in trying to figure it out, I would have tried a bunch of things and there would have been some learning there. And it would have been sticky as well because it was painful. I would remember it. And yeah, I'm finding it's a bit of a Trojan horse because you trust the output with time. It's quite authoritative in how it communicates. And it generates a lot. So it's kind of I'm wondering if the job in the future is checking the work of AI. And if you had, for example, a software engineer doing the work of 10 people, someone still needs to check that work. They probably won't employ an extra 10 people to do the checking. So I think very soon we're going to have like AI writing code, AI writing the tests for the code, and then AI checking it. And it's just going to be the volume of it's going to be so hard to have that like human quality control. It's not perfect. Humans make mistakes as well. But the problem is as well, if people, example of coding, like if they're not practicing, like they lose that skill as well. It starts to atrophy quite quick. And if it replaces junior people, there's no seniors in the future because you need the juniors to work their way up and get experience. So I'm just worried if we outsource everything to AI, that people kind of lose their skills and abilities and the sheer volume of what AI creates. It's really hard to find the little mistakes in what looks very plausible. And I think that maps onto many different jobs and professions as well. And if you were to check its output super carefully, there's like zero productivity gain. Because it's easier just to do the work yourself than to let AI do it and then check it. So yeah, on one hand, it's wonderful and amazing and super impressive, and on the other hand, I don't know, I think it's a bit of a recipe for disaster, and there'll probably be some high-profile consequences, like a bug in some serious system, plane falls out of the sky or something. So yeah, it's both like really good and maybe really bad as well. I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I write software also, and I write software for aircraft instruments where there are very strict standards on how to do it. And one thing that AI might be a very positive thing is that in my line, what tends to happen is people tend to write the software and then they kind of reverse engineer the requirements, at least the lower level requirements. And now that it makes sense because the skill of writing a solid set of requirements, I think, is harder because there's sort of an abstraction involved. Well, there is an abstraction involved. Whereas if we move the human effort to writing really solid clear, complete requirements, then it may be perfectly all right to let AI write the code because it's been guided carefully enough that the output should be okay. Now, I understand that we still have the issue of you still have to verify what's produced. And if we don't watch it, we could end up, well, hopefully we could end up in a situation where there's a productivity increase, but it's not guaranteed. So certainly I acknowledge that it's yet to be proven, but uh, uh, it has the potential. I mean, after all, you could flip that and say that it could check. Well, as you mentioned you were using it for debugging. Now, there you go. You wrote the code and it's helping to identify problems. It's hard to see how that's a problem. That's good, right? If you have it flipped where the AI writes the code and humans are trying to figure out problems, well, that could be harder. That is harder, inherently harder. So it's like, I mean, it's a very real question, I would say. Do you really want to teach elementary school students how to multiply? Because on the one hand, it's certainly important that they understand the concept of multiplication. But if every single person on the planet basically has a calculator in their pocket, is it really advantageous to know what 6 times 6 is? Okay. I don't know. I mean, I think I can argue both sides of that. And a similar thing is going to apply to AI. Well, we already have it with Google. You can just, before AI, Google search is very effective, and now it's even more effective. So, how important is it to remember what happened in the year 1066 in England? One can argue that you could spend more time talking about the social conditions that led to the Norman conquest and not spend so much time on dates, perhaps. I don't know.
I'm curious if we have more thoughts on AI, but both of you have made me think about my work experience using it. So Nancy has the fuller story, but the nutshell is that I graduated from law school a little over a year ago. And so I had all of my education without generative AI. And then when I started working, shortly, I was at a pretty small firm, and the boss was all in on AI, generative AI. We need to use ChatGPT for everything. And so soon I was required to use it as much as possible, at least getting it involved in every task that I was doing, which a lot of it might be legal research, but some of it was also drafting and writing pleadings, briefs, and so on. And all the lawyers at the firm had a big problem with using ChatGPT as much as we were asked to. But sometimes we had to admit, kind of similar to Andy's experience, that it was very helpful. So, you might be saying, what was that one case we read in law school about this and that and the other thing? But the request was too specific for Google, and Google isn't very good at coming up with cases anyway. So we'd ask ChatGPT, and usually it would come up with the right answer. And then all it took for us to verify was just look up the case, read it again, and say, oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. And similar thing with if you had written your own brief on your own and then put it through ChatGPT and said, hey, here's the style of writing it should be, give me some feedback, then you have a decision about whether or not to take that feedback on board. But I think that is a pretty big line to cross to then say, let's have it just go ahead and write for us. I never did that. I'm pretty sure people at the firm were not doing that, but it would be these days, the courts are starting to catch up with it a bit to say that's an ethical violation. You can't do that, or you have to disclose at least that you use these tools. But legal research is so, especially in a profession that's hourly billing, the idea that you can just cut the amount of time that people need to use to do legal research is huge. So even if we're moving away from hourly billing, and that may be part of it, it's very attractive to firms to be able to say, we can just give our lawyers these tools. But building on what Andy and Joseph were saying too, both of you and I, even despite being just out of school, we had our education without these tools. So we had to learn the old fashioned way. And that makes us able to verify the output of the tools and do quality control and supervise them. But I worry about somebody who's coming up now, even coming up through law school or is in college now. If you've used those tools for your education and you learned through the tool, how are you able to quality control it?
It's a really interesting question. And also, I just want to say hi, William. I'm glad they were able to join us again. Thanks. I feel it means a lot that you like had to leave and then you were able to come back. But okay, I know I want to make some time for other people's questions too, so it's really hard to balance all these priorities. But Lucy, one thing that your question made me think of is that I think like right now we have the knowledge to be able to do the fact checking, and maybe that is like the thing that becomes more valuable in the future is being able to assess what is real or not. I was reading some other book about like attention economy and how right now like we live in a place where there's just an abundance of information, and as a result, it becomes more important to discern like what is actually true versus what is just, you know, potentially like gossip. And they were saying like in the past we never had to worry about this because it was actually like an information deficit. So like I don't know. I'm not sure how many of you relate to this, but it's like you'll see people from other generations. Like I think about my parents, and sometimes they send me news articles where I'm like, clearly this is fake information. But I feel like part of the reason why I know that is just because I've like been trained to look out for like what are some signs that the information is true or not. And I wonder like that might be a skill that becomes more important in the future just because of the fact that you can just build anything with AI. Does anyone want to close out on the conversation, or maybe we can I see you've been unmuted for some time, so I'm wondering if you wanted to share anything, and then we can go into audience questions, perhaps.
Yeah, I guess related to the book, something that I was thinking about also related to this conversation is just meritocracy as a system. I feel like um, it's very easy to think like, oh yeah, the ones who are the most knowledgeable, the most qualified should should dictate how we solve these problems. Like I think it's like the argument for meritocracy, at least at a surface level, um, is pretty compelling. But then going through this book, the idea that it's more like a myth because of like, you know, who is dictating, who is assigning this value, who is saying like, you know, one is greater than the other. And um, I think with AI, almost that bubble that's created is reinforced a lot more. Um, so it's easier to just agree with it, especially, you know, when AI is saying something with authority, ChatGPT is, it's like, okay, yeah, like they have the backing of most of the internet, they're probably right. So like, yeah, I do agree with that point of like being able to fact check it is going to be like a critical thing. And I don't know, like, you know, if you know, kids who are being brought up in the schooling system right now, like how do we actually teach this skill of not just fact checking, but like, you know, how do you identify when this very conversational tool, as if a friend is telling you this information, like what are the things that you should check and sign up on? And I think what Vonnegut is writing here sometimes is like, well, what are the outcomes when you don't do that? Like when you have this supercomputer that's just telling you these are the ways that things are, and eventually, like with this slippery slope, you go far enough that like, well, now the system has changed, and like now questioning it is the outlier response, whereas it should have been like, you know, the starting default response. Um, so I think, yeah, that, and also with how we think of progress and innovation in science today, like what is the driving force of it right now? Like, is it really what we need as a society to help with these real human issues? Or does it seem like it's more often, you know, profit driven or, you know, competition in other corporate spaces? Is it driven by that And I mean, is how do we address something like that? Where like it seems almost like our what things that should be helping us increase our creativity, allow for more human ingenuity, is actually in some way stifling it. And we would hope that we can use AI to solve very human problems that would better us as a society. But I think when we look at what it has been doing, or like, news articles of what's coming up next with AI, often it doesn't seem that way of like bettering all of society, and seems a lot more profit driven in a way. So then, I mean, I think it's pretty impressive just in reading Vonnegut's writing of how he captured that. Um,
I'm waiting to see if anyone wants to share anything before I start blabbing again. Okay, well, yeah, I think audit, like something that you made me think of is just kind of this idea that, um, like I think right now we do trust ChatGPT because, like as you mentioned, like there's so many sources that it uses, and oftentimes like the way that I think other people have alluded to the tone of like the authoritative tone that it uses. There was an article that I linked a little bit earlier, and William, I can send it again just because I know you rejoined, but it was an interesting question around like if the algorithm tells you like one way of doing things and it's technically correct, but it has like okay, so like the example that they used is like an Uber driver where the algorithm will tell it like the most optimal route, but the algorithm also might not know all the details. Like maybe it's like a not safe place to drive, and actually there's a way that will take a little bit longer, but it's like more safe and it will get a better outcome in terms of like passenger safety, for example. And so they were saying like, okay, like in what times do you accept the algorithm's decision versus like when do you decide to do something, maybe like make your own independent decision. And I feel like that kind of ties back into what you were saying around just like how do you, in a world where we have algorithms now, still allow people to like have the agency to decide what is right or wrong. And more than that, like being able to like champion and advocate for people that might be saying something that the algorithm is not. And that got me thinking a lot more about just like the creativity of it, which is that I think ingenuity comes from the places where we think ChatGPT is like wrong, or maybe like we think that there's a better decision that could be made than what the algorithm said previously. And I think that's just like building on previous information to generate something new in the future. So those are just some thoughts that I had. William, I'm curious, like you joined, and then I know you didn't really get to talk much in the group, but was there anything that you wanted to talk about in terms of either the book or just like this discussion topic in general?
I'm still gathering th my thoughts. I'm sorry. It's been a crazy day for me, as you could imagine, honestly. But let me think about it more and I'll get back
Okay.
to you.
All
Thanks.
right, sounds good. Yeah, I was thinking like we can kind of just do a free forum of like what are some questions that you all had coming into this discussion? Like I'm sure when you saw the topic, like there was something specific that came to mind for you. Um, Feel free to take over. Me and Lucy have been asking a lot of different questions, and I'm happy to still pull from those, but yeah, I'm just curious what's been on people's minds.
I'm something that interested me was kind of the weakening of former status symbols. Like you talked about how it's sort of efficiency over everything, but that's not the case for everything. Like for example, they keep secretaries even though the secretaries don't seem to do anything. It's just for the purposes of making the
Mm,
engineers look good because they're secretary. But it's like they just they're sort of who's it impressing kind of anyone at this stage, like because it's just this kind of vestige of before the previous war almost that it was impressive to have a secretary, but now it's doesn't actually do anything. And similarly, like everyone's a doctor kind of the sort of title itself has almost become meaningless just because if you're part of that society, then it's just by then you're going to be a doctor. So like former status symbols, which were just sort of their former meaning has kind of been eaten away by this new society just because people have clustered to have a status symbol without having the sort of additional bits which were actually made it impressive in the previous times. It's now just a kind of gaudy show off type thing.
Well, I think the main thing that I take from a main thing I take from this book that I had thought about beforehand is, there's more to life than efficiency. And that was mentioned by other people in the discussion. If you had, for example, hypothesized that Khan is successful and they can give anybody who wants one a perfect AI tutor, well, that wouldn't be good to isolate everybody and to have their own AI tutor if that was the only interaction they had, because their school doesn't have to be school, but school serves a function of social interaction. And obviously you can do that in other ways, but I think it's an extremely important thing. And work is, there is a role in work of social interaction. And if you're sitting in a cubicle and all you need is to talk to ChatGPT to get your job done, that eliminates conferring with your colleagues, let's say, to get the job done. And so I think that that's an important element of life. Relates to meaning, and Vonnegut is talking about a world where a major aspect of meaning has been eliminated, and that causes huge social issues.
Also, it was mentioned like near the start in terms of, but I don't think it was followed up on. In terms of like name analysis, it's Paul Proteus, and Proteus is shape-shifting kind of god of the sea in the Odyssey, I think is that's one of those. But it's and sort of being like versatile, adaptable, but it's kind of noticeable how unadaptable he is. He's kind of Paul Proteus is not at home in either society. He feels instinctively sort of out of place among the doctors and engineers and all those people. But when he goes to the more poor side, he's sort of instantly recognized as being an outsider, despite his sort of name. He's not got a sort of home of people who he sort of feels comfortable with, or he can feel comfortable within. He's not the shapeshifter or not versatile in any way. He's kind of sticks out like a sore thumb wherever he is. But I don't know if there is any further sort of name stuff which people would.
Oh, Lucy has so many name things that I know you want to mention, Lucy.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. Yes, Paul Proteus, in our American pronunciation. Exactly what you were saying, Jamie. I think the only other thing to add is that I would lay money that he was intentionally named Paul, and meant to evoke the story of the Apostle Paul converting to Christianity and becoming a huge figure in early Christianity. And that sense of conversion and being central to Paul's story, and also the sense of transformation in Proteus, I think go together well, but also, as you're saying, have somewhat of an uncomfortable relationship with how the character actually was. He arguably was often trying to shift to swarm and be in multiple places at once, but as you point out, not always successfully. But I'm curious if people have other thoughts about that name or other names or other ideas entirely.
I think with Paul, at least, he doesn't really know what he wants. Like he's not content. But I think, yeah, that like changing of even like what his own desires are is at least that was part of like the change aspect of his name that I saw as well. Like, he he knows what he has right now, something's off, but like I think, really exactly what do you want, Paul? He's not sure. Um, and I don't think he really gets to that point. Maybe towards the end he has a better idea, but even then it's still like a little hazy on what he wants as a person. So
Yeah, I think the only connection that I thought of is Kroner, right? Is that his name? It reminds me of Cronus, like the Titan, right, from Greek mythology, and how he was like he literally like eating his children or whatever to I don't remember why he ate the children, but I think he was kind of a scary god. And like yeah, the fact that he's the head of the company does make me think a little bit about like he's the upholder of the system. He's someone that like really espouses the belief in automation and that's a good for a force for good and all of that.
The great connection, Nance.
Oh, it was made up on the fly. I was like, wait a second. I didn't think I had any, but this is one that, yeah, anyways.
I knew you did. I think it had to do with a prophecy that he was trying to keep from happening,
Oh, okay, wait, I'm gonna look this up too.
that his children
Because
would
I
conquer him.
can. Oh, you're right. Chronos
Mm.
eating kids.
A distinct management style, to be sure.
No, you're so right. He feared the prophecy he would be overthrown by one of his offspring, so then he
Yeah.
just ate all of them.
Yeah, that's one way of managing that.
Hmm.
Yep. Other names? Actually, continuing on the mythology, sort of, Ilium is the Roman name for Troy. And oddly enough, Troy, New York is a real place and was mentioned in this book, but Ilium is a separate place in the book. But I think he chose the name Ilium specifically because for the ancient Romans, Troy was a semi-mythical place. So it was the birthplace of Aeneas, who was their forefather and founding figure. And Ilium was a sort of partially imaginary ideal place and a city on a hill and something to return to in their ideals. So there was that ancient epic of the Trojan War in the fall, and Aeneas's founding of Rome, I think, was sort of evoked there.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. That's a consciously chosen name. It's not an accident.
Yeah, Lucy made a lot of connections to things that I didn't even know about. You should talk about the Epic Hack one too.
So Epicac, my mom was laughing about that earlier. She started the book. The only thing I could think of is that Epicac is meant to sound like Ipecac, which was an old thing to make people vomit.
Mm.
So it's probably just a way of making fun of the big supercomputer.
ChatGPT makes me vomit with its horrible answers sometimes, you know?
The minor character, Private Edgar Rice Burroughs Hagstrom. Obviously, his first three names are Edgar Rice Burroughs, which is the author who wrote Tarzan. And I haven't read Tarzan, but I think it has, more so at least than the Disney movie, it has a lot more discussion about searching for meaning in society and what happens if you're raised completely outside society and what the
Okay,
confines of it are.
I need to say a couple quick things.
For it.
For a long time, I lived in Oak Park, which is where Edgar Rice Burroughs either was born or lived. He's claimed by Oak Park, Illinois. If you're at all interested, you should read the book Tarzan because it's nothing like any Tarzan video, production I've ever seen. An example in the books, Tarzan is multilingual. He speaks both French and English. Now, he learned this because his parents, who were killed, they went to Africa. You know, it's set in Africa. They left behind phonograph records. And now I think it's implausible that he would be able to learn the language that way, but that is the suggested mechanism. So he could read and write. And I'm not an expert in all the Tarzan movies, but I know a number of them show Tarzan as being illiterate. He was very literate in the book, very literate in the book. So anyway, for what it's worth.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe we can have a follow-up discussion on Tarzan sometime.
That's wild. I feel like I did not know anything about Tarzan or the fact like that, it was like an actual book before this. So
yeah, and it was completely different than any representation. But same thing is true about Frankenstein, by the way. The book is quite different from well, I haven't seen all the adaptations, but certainly the classic older adaptations were just crazy compared to the book.
Well, the best one is obviously Young Frankenstein.
Well, yes, that's a satire. There you go. I'm completely on board with that. Yeah. Yeah, that's having fun. I'm always in favor of having fun.
Do we have other questions or thoughts before we wrap up with our book recos?
Book recos, Joseph's story about hearing from Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
Also, I think it'd be fun to do a group photo at some point if y'all are okay with that.
Sure, I'm down.
So let me say my 2 minutes about Vonnegut. So I went to see him give a lecture. This is 20 years ago, maybe. I don't know. It's been a while. There are two things I clearly remember. One is that he gave his, I think, somewhat famous lines about his summary of what women want and what men want. So take it for what it's worth. This is Vonnegut, and I'm mangling it slightly. What do women want? Women want to be surrounded by lots of people and have lots of social interactions. And what do men want? They don't want women to yell at them. That was his summary. Take it for what it's worth, okay? The second thing is he did his bit about categorizing plots into, categories. Like, this isn't like boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. The summary was on the level of that, very simplistic. And you have things like the hero's quest, where the hero goes out to achieve something and succeeds. Okay, so you can just search online and you can see. I think there's even video clips. I'm sure there are, of him actually giving this discussion. So I remember those two things. He did a really nice job of giving a lecture, and I'm so glad I got to see him.
Where was the lecture?
Skokie, Illinois.
Oh,
okay. See if it's online somewhere. That'd be nice.
I don't know if that particular one is online, but if you go to YouTube and you search for Vonnegut plot summary or something like that, I think it'll pop right up.
The algorithm can give it to us.
Yeah. Well, so that's my quick summary of having met, so to speak, Vonnegut.
Very cool. All right, with the last 8 minutes, I know we have 7 people, but that gives us basically a minute each to talk. And if I run over, I'll take 2 minutes. But yeah, maybe we could do like I think I'm curious, like, what is something that you've like taken away from the conversation? And it's okay if you're like, actually, I didn't take anything away. And then maybe like like another book recommendation for the people in the chat. Feel free to like throw it in the chat as well as share it actually. And I'm not going first this time. Does anyone else? Lucy?
I think what I've taken away from the discussion is that the machines can never replace us talking to each other about what we think. We got to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Especially different sorts of people don't usually interact. So thank you, Nancy, for organizing this. And my book reco is not similar to Player Piano, but I recommend it to a lot of people. It's called Forever by Pete Hamill, and it's the story of a young man in rural Ireland in 1735, I want to say, who winds up having to leave Ireland, sailing to the US, and when he gets to Manhattan, settles down there because he has been given immortality in exchange for never leaving the Isle of Manhattan. So then the story follows him all the way through 2001. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. Pete Hamill's a great writer. Died a couple of years ago, but had great novels of all sorts. And a couple memoirs, I think, too. So it's especially good if you love New York or interested or live there. But even if you don't, I think it's a wonderful novel. Oh, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, I put it in the chat.
I'm going to jump in quickly.
Go for it.
Thank you, Nancy, for holding this. I don't know what to say the takeaway is, except I didn't really realize that I would get a chance to participate. I thought I was just going to be able to listen. I'm very grateful that I got to participate. And next time,
We are too.
Next time I'll be better prepared. I'll review a little bit more. Book recommendations. Nonfiction. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, which I think is a great psychology book. And fiction, it's long, and it is a non-scary Stephen King book called 11/22/63. I think it's my favorite Stephen King. It's not a horror scary thing. Okay.
Nancy is not a horror person.
It's not a horror thing. It's historic, and I thought it was fantastic. And anyway, for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Feel free to call in the next person, Joseph.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had to do that. Oh, wait. Addit?
Sure.
Do I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think one of my takeaways from this is just being even more impressed by Vonnegut's writing. Like how cool we can have a discussion like this, 60, 70 years later, and it still feels so top of mind. But also, the same problems that he was discussing then, we don't have a lot of solutions for them now, but I'm glad that we're also thinking about it. So yeah, thank you guys all for your thoughts there. My book rec would be, it's my favorite book. It's called Inciting Joy by Ross Gay. It is a collection of essays about joy and how we can find joy in many places that normally we wouldn't think of as happy or joyful, but really because of the community that it can bring about, has a lot of value in it. So, and with that, I can ask Andy to go next.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both for hosting. It's been super interesting and nice to talk to you all. I don't really read a lot of fiction these days, actually. So this was the first fictional book I've read in a while. So my recommendation would be a non-fiction book. It's called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, and it's all mostly about Facebook and Google and how they lured us in with free things and then mined our data. And it's maybe a bit of a horror theme that'll make you worry about the future of what ChatGPT is going to do when they need to start monetizing it more. Maybe we're training them how to replace them. But yeah, really good book. And yeah, thank you both for hosting. And I will pass to Jamie.
Yeah, sure. Just to echo your sentiments. Thank you very much for hosting. It's been very interesting. In terms of what I've taken away, I think it's sort of been thinking about the people who've. I mean, we talked about the sort of declining hours in workday, past and maybe into the future, and just how people can still, or not still, but what meaning people can find from their lives, kind of, which isn't work, and how people are going to kind of achieve that is what I've been thinking on, and just where people can do it so we don't end up as a sort of like clamoring for the past. And but yeah, and in terms of books, there's one called The Man Who Was Thursday a Nightmare by G.K. Chesterton, which at least kind of slightly similar. A detective kind of has to go undercover in an anarchist cell, and it kind of all spirals out from there in terms of what anarchism is and all that. But yeah, it's funny and interesting, and it's William.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jamie, for passing along to me. Yeah, I think a lot of this book is about finding meaning in your life, and that maybe efficiency automation isn't always the best way to get there. I think on that note, I have some really cool articles I found online on Substack. I can link them in here. One's by Tina He, one's by Packy McCormick. Both kind of the same concept, more focused on like, I guess, the individual people and stories in this world as the world becomes a lot more, I guess, efficient, technocratic, stuff like that. So really cool. And then for my book rec, there's a book called Don't Forget We're Here Forever by Lamorna Ash. It's about like, I guess, young British people finding religion in the current 21st century. I think it's a really impactful book in light of what's going on. I think it's pretty relevant to the book that we read for this discussion. And I think also she's a really wonderful writer. It's like really beautiful prose. So definitely worth a shot if you guys have time.
Very cool. And thanks everyone for kind of wrapping things up very neatly. We're at 6 now, or 6 my time. I guess for me, I feel like there's just been a lot of things that have been really interesting about this conversation. I would have not made the connection around like some of the names in the book, for example, but I think it's also an interesting assessment of just like like how do we think about social progress in context of the AI and the automations that we're seeing today? Obviously, we can't go into the past anymore where the AI didn't exist. So thinking more about like what does it enable us? And maybe even just like rethinking some of the assumptions that we had. I think Joseph, you had mentioned this thing around like having a private tutor, like one-on-one working with each student. I think that's like I've been thinking about this more in terms of just like how do we lead life today? From things like even just like looking at your menu for a restaurant, how come you can't see like the picture of every single dish on the menu? Like you just have to guess sometimes that like something will taste good, even if you don't know what it's going to look like. And I think that's interesting. How does AI enable like maybe more discovery and like doing things that we've never thought of but from before? I think that my book recommendation right now would be um, Audit's gonna laugh at me because I've been really championing this book for a while now. But there's this book about public transportation in Seattle that's kind of like Humans of New York, but it's about this man who drives the bus in Seattle, and just like about like different people in his life that he's met through driving the bus. And it's called The Lines That Make Us. I'll drop that in the chat. It's very unrelated to this conversation, so I guess the book that I was referencing from earlier that I think could be interesting for folks is called Attention Economy, and it's written by a newscaster. The name is escaping me right now, but I'm sure I'll be able to find it. Oh, Chris Hayes. So I thought that was an interesting book. It helped me understand a little bit more about the world around us. Anyways, thank you so much. I might send out a follow-up email just to be like, hey, like any feedback. I know like maybe there were some questions we didn't get to, and like, if we want to do a follow-up to this one, happy to maybe schedule another hour if we think that's useful or interesting for folks. But last thing before we all leave, I will take a quick photo. So if you all are okay with it, maybe I'll just count us down and then smile and then I'll take a screenshot. Does that sound good? You can turn off your camera if you're like, I don't want to do this. Okay. 3, 2, 1, cheese. All right, cool. I'm gonna send that to Anna, and then I will also send it out to all of you via email. But It was really lovely to meet you all. Thank you so much for joining. Andy, like I see in the background, like the day has turned into night already. So I imagine it's been quite some time that we've been on this call, and I'm really grateful that you all spent the time. It was a really heartwarming conversation, and I think I got a lot out of it too, just to be able to discuss the book a little bit more. But yeah, any closing thoughts from you, Lucy, before we head out?
Thank you, Nancy.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Good
thank you
to meet you all.
too. It was really fun co-hosting this, and I'm once again, this is our first salon, so it's been really fun experience for both of us. All right. Have a good day, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.